I think we'll go ahead and get started simply because it is right after the noon hour. So if I could have your attention, we'll get started. My name is Michelle Gaines. I am the new director of Title IV Part A. Thank you very much, Skip, for the warm applause. This is our fourth annual DOE Human Trafficking Lunch and Learn. I'm very excited you're here. You may not hear me through this mic, but we're recording today, as we have for the past 3 years. This will be available on our webpage once it is edited and transcribed. It will be there for you to be able to send it out to your stakeholders, share with your family and friends. But today I just want to give you a little context for today's conversation. Since 2014, here at the department, we've been working with school districts, with teachers and administrators to bring this awareness effort, the message to our schools, but not just to teachers. We've been talking to folks all over the state, all types of school personnel, from school bus drivers to nurses, the SROs. We've been working diligently to bring it to the food nutrition services, folks who have direct contact with students. So it's important that although we are in the Department of Education, we know, and I understand that everyone has a different role here. We may have not all come from schools, we may have all been teachers in the past, but it's important to know that this issue is something that faces all of us. It's a global issue, yes. It's also a national issue, and it's an issue that deals with right here in Florida, as well as in our own backyard. And today we have a great guest. I apologize, I'm a little out of breath, I had to run to get the water, so you better drink that water. I ran out to my car on B2 to get the water, and so please have some refreshments. Like I said, we are recording, so if you have to leave, I recognize if your break may be only a certain amount of time, you need to go. Just be mindful of the camera there, and just exit accordingly and know that this will be available later on. But I really appreciate you being here. We have resources on our human trafficking webpage, which was just updated last Tuesday. And so there's new information there. January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So you've all made a great step to come here to learn more. So I'm curious, by show of hands, how many people have been to a training or have received any information in the past about human trafficking? Show of hands. Awesome. How many people have heard me do a fantastic presentation on human trafficking? Anybody? Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate that. You can get an extra bag of chips later on. But folks, I am happy that you're here. In all seriousness, this is an important but a very serious topic. And just know that when you hear this message today from my friend and colleague over at the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center, Robin Hassler-Thompson is the executive director there. She's an attorney. She's an advocate. She trains right here in our state. She trains all over the nation and internationally. And it's my pleasure to introduce her. She's going to share some insights, give us what we need to know, and really hopefully broaden our level of understanding about human trafficking in Florida and the world. So without any further ado, Robin Hassler.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here with you today. I was actually here, I don't know how many years ago, and did a training with school bus drivers. I think you had some big meeting up here, and it was quite wonderful. You know, you already probably know how great Michelle is. I mean, she has trained over 6,000 or 7,000 people around the state on this issue. And working with state agencies all over here in Tallahassee, I have to say that the Department of Education, what you've got on your website, and the work that's done by Michelle is exemplary in terms of really any other state agency. So you are so lucky, and we are so lucky to be working with her at STAC. She mentioned the group that I am the executive director of. STAC is the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center. This is a program that started in 2015. We do two main things. We work directly with victims of human trafficking, whether labor trafficking or sex trafficking, and we work with them to case manage as well as to kind of partner with agencies that are already providing services to them. In fact, I'll get to that slide. And we also do awareness. So that's why I'm here. And I'm here to talk to you not just as Department of Education employees, but as members of the community at large in our state. You're employees here, but you're also members of, say, faith communities, PTAs, running groups, all the things that you do. And I have to say, whatever you are doing, however you sit in the community, whoever you interact with as a member in a neighborhood association, as an employee, as a consumer, that you've got something to do to help end human trafficking. So this is who we are. As you can see, our work is all around the Big Bend. So we're in Leon County and all of our surrounding counties. In fact, we have a big initiative now to move into our rural areas and do more work there. And we also do, as you can see, agency-specific training. So before going to my next slide, what I wanted to do is read to you some stories of human trafficking that I put together, stories that I gleaned from either our local newspaper, from cases that we have worked here locally, or from cases statewide. These are based on real stories, and we've changed names, etc., to protect victim privacy. So here are some stories. Alberto worked on a farm. He was promised a job where he could send money home every month. He arrived to live in squalid conditions and was told he had a $10,000 debt to pay when for transportation, food, and housing. He saw no way out. Angeline worked as a nanny and took care of 3 children. She worked for a rich family from her home country. While she was working there, the 17-year-old son raped her. The mother beat her. She worked for 14 hours a day with little pay, and she was lied to by her employer about the job. She lived on the porch and she slept on a cot, and told investigators that the dogs in the home were treated better than she was. Sam and Joe were both American-born men. They were homeless. They lived in a shelter in Dade County. Every once in a while, a white van came by and promised them food, job, even beer and drugs. They picked potatoes and cabbage, and they were paid by the farmer in drugs, alcohol. They lived in a deplorable housing. Natasha was from a poor country. She came to be a model in the U.S. She was raped when she got here, and she had to serve 30 to 40 men every night. She never saw any of the money, and she was arrested by the police during a sting. Sylvia's 15. Her mother's a drug addict, and she's been sexually abused by her mom's boyfriend since she was 7. She ran away from home. Trafficker posed as a boyfriend, bought her clothes, said she was pretty, and he promised to love her. He said he would take her to Florida for a vacation. They just needed some money. He posted compromising pictures of her online and later said he'd tell her parents if she didn't do exactly what he said. William is developmentally disabled. He was placed in a group home by the state. A pastor and his wife had other developmentally disabled people there at their house. They forced them to work on a farm, perform household work, often nude. He forced them to have sex with each other. Francis worked for a pastor named Romeo. He forced him and other young boys into prostitution. He made them take crystal meth, Viagra, and alcohol, and Xanax so they could perform better. He threatened to kill them, and he raped them. Julie, 16, came over in a van with 24 other kids from Jacksonville. She was picked up at a bus station and promised a trip and money if she would go door to door and sell magazines and chocolates. She was dropped off in nicer neighborhoods and given a script by the trafficker. She stays in a cheap motel with other minors crammed into 2 rooms. She owes money to the traffickers, she says, for her cell phone and for food. So these are all stories of actual trafficking cases that have taken place here in Florida, and some of which were right here in Leon County. Does any of that surprise you? Yeah, yes and no, yeah. I mean, if you think about it, the people in the case scenarios were young and old. They were kids. They were trafficked for both labor and for sex. And so there's a whole variety of trafficking that takes place, unfortunately, in our world. And it's one of the reasons why we work so closely with other agencies, because you can see, we've seen children as young as 3 years old be trafficked. We've seen, older men from India who are welders be trafficked to work on oil rigs outside of New Orleans after Katrina. We've seen all kinds of people, both foreign-born and American, people who are male and female, obviously, documented, undocumented, young, old, and imagine what a shelter would look like to help all those people. Imagine what one agency could do to help all those people, and it's impossible to think of that. So it's really incumbent on all of us to think about how it really does take a village to address victims' needs, and it's really rooted in the fact that trafficking victims are so diverse. Any reactions off the top to any of those stories? Anything? When those of you who said you were surprised, what surprised you?
Well, I guess what surprised me is that no one noticed.
No one noticed, right. That is something that often happens. These things are going on and you just think, oh, well, they're working in a restaurant, or kids going door to door. We see that all the time. It's like, that could be trafficking, really? What else? Any other comments? Yes?
Why aren't they in school?
Why aren't they in school? Or, wondering, why did this happen? How could this keep, going on? Maybe they're clever enough to traffic the kids only on Saturdays, so those questions don't get asked. Traffickers are a wily bunch, yeah.
Where are the parents?
Parents of the children, who knows? And unfortunately, what we've seen in our area as well, parents sometimes actually traffic their own children. So the case in Gadsden County recently, the young girl who was found on the houseboat in Apalachicola was being trafficked by her parents for drugs. And what we've seen with the opioid crisis is that more and more that's happening, where parents are trafficking young children to support their drug habit, essentially to get the money and to support their drug habit. So that's one of the intersectionality issues too we're talking about with law enforcement. As you're working with gangs, understand gangs are going to be sex trafficking people. As you work on the opioid issue and you make a bust, understand that this could be happening too. So that intersectionality issue is omnipresent with trafficking. Any other comments to those scenarios? Yes?
Usually I think of women and children being targeted, but you shared, the one you shared about the homeless men, the fact that they were like adult men.
Yes, usually she said she often thinks of women and children as victims, which is true. They say the statistics are 80% of the time that's the case. But the case about African American men, that was actually the Palatka case. That was the Evans family farm. That happened in Florida. White vans went to homeless shelters, picked up African American men, targeted them because they wanted them to be dependent on them, and so they chose men who had substance abuse issues and did promise to pay them in drugs and alcohol. And when, and that case broke open, and this is why I love starting to talk and say, look, you have a lot of different hats as you're sitting here. That was a case where the farm where this was happening was reported for dumping human waste into the St. Johns River. So the EPA went to investigate, looked around, saw the working conditions, saw the housing conditions of these workers, and said something is not right here, and called the FBI. Then the FBI went in and did the trafficking investigation and found what was going on, even found the books that showed how these traffickers / farmers were paying the workers in drugs and alcohol. That's the, you think about the stupid criminal stories you hear, but there was the evidence right there that they found. And the people, the Evanses, were convicted of federal crimes and put into federal prison. And so they did get a conviction in that case for what they were doing. I also think that's an important case because people often think it's just foreign-born who are labor trafficked, just migrant farm workers or people who are brought to this country and their visas expire. These are American citizens, just like American citizen runaway girls are trafficked and boys, so are both Americans and foreign-born people trafficked. So good, really good observations. So you can get the sense that we call human trafficking modern-day slavery because that's essentially what it is. So who has seen the movie Taken? Okay, so you remember Liam Neeson's daughter gets snatched off the streets of Paris, and he's a retired special forces, and he goes and rescues, and that's not trafficking. I mean, it is trafficking in the sense that people are kidnapped sometimes, but I will tell you 99.9% of the time, it's not like that, okay? If only, oops, sorry, I'm hitting this microphone. Victor said, if only we had special forces people, there to kind of rescue and help trafficking victims after they've been taken or after they've been enslaved. But that's not the case. So the book I always think of is Colson Whitehead's book, Underground Railroad. It was like one of the best books 2 years ago about slavery in the United States. That book describes what happens in terms of how modern day slaves are kept, especially in both labor and in sex trafficking situations. So we call it invisible trains. Sometimes chains. Sometimes we refer to trafficking as people are in a prison without walls because of the coercion and the threats that are present. Florida is number 3rd in the nation in terms of trafficking. So that happens, and we get those numbers from both the Human Trafficking Hotline, which we have many outreach tools here on the side that will give you that hotline number, 888-38-38-3737, 888. I've been doing a lot of talking this month so far. But we also know that from the number of prosecutions that are done. People have said that Florida is ground zero for human trafficking because we have a lot of low-skilled, low-wage labor in many different industries, in the service industry, in the entertainment industries. We have very porous borders. We have many airports. We are lined by a coast. So the coming in and out is very easy for people. As I mentioned, there are 3 elements of trafficking. There's a process by which people are recruited or harbored or obtained in some way and they might be moved, but they don't have to be moved to be trafficked. And there's use of force, which can be that physical abduction. Fraud, someone is promised a job here, and when they get here, it's been all a lie. They've been defrauded. And some level of coercion. And that really was the biggest thing in terms of the law in improving the situation for trafficking victims, because that coercion is the invisible chains, the prison without walls. If you call the police, I'll kill your baby. If you call the police, I'll foreclose on your father's farm back in our home country. If you try to be free, if you say anything to anybody about this abuse, you will be harmed in the following ways. So that coercion piece is very strong. And I meant to say this at the beginning, but if you have any questions, let's get them asked and answered in our process here, not wait until the end, because sometimes the information is really foundational, and I'd love to answer your questions up front. So let me stop now. Anybody have any questions? Okay. So we know that the human trafficking is definitely on the rise. We see the internet facilitating trafficking an awful lot. It is market driven within gangs and in organized crime situations. It can also be a phenomenon that's just done one-on-one. And we know it's very lucrative. As you can guess, organized crime often traffic guns and drugs as well as people. And what we found now is that human trafficking is second in terms of money making for those who are in criminal enterprises and the mafia, et cetera. So what you've got is a highly lucrative, high gain, low risk industry. And here are some of the examples of where people are trafficked into. Some of them were, that weren't included in the scenarios include mail order bride situations. You've heard of those, I'm sure. Begging, commissions of criminal acts like being a drug mule or shoplifting. One case I heard recently was a guy who was forcing young boys not only into prostitution but to going into stores and stealing really expensive sports jerseys and apparel that the trafficker would then resell. So people are trafficked in all kinds of ways. They're forced to do these crimes. We know that some of the trends are trafficking of the disabled. So again, one of those scenarios involved a case, it was actually out of Kansas, where people represented themselves as the pastor in this religious group home, but they were actually forcing people to work in these deplorable, perverted ways. So, and unfortunately, the targeting of disabled people are, they're very vulnerable, right? So that is really becoming, excuse me, more and more common. We also see labor trafficking cases be on the rise. If you look at TV and look at any of the SVU shows, or look at a lot of the news reports, you often hear about sex trafficking cases. And one of the reasons for that is that prostitution is illegal anyway. So if you see someone engaging in prostitution, law enforcement is used to making busts and stings, and that's a crime, right? So you can kind of get there pretty easily in terms of spotting and detecting that kind of crime. The difference for in labor trafficking is you can go to a restaurant, you don't know if someone who's serving your breakfast is being trafficked or cleaning your room. We had a trafficking case at the Sandestin Hilton here. That was a labor contractor who brought in the hotel housekeeping staff and again, trafficked them and forced them here. It was a fraud and coercion, excuse me, were used. So the number one thing is vulnerability. If you can just think of anybody who's vulnerable. The other day I presented at a faith event on Saturday, and one of the things that surprised some folks was that about a case I've heard of nurses in the Philippines who were trafficked. So you'd say, well gosh, they're educated and they could probably even speak English maybe, but what would be their vulnerability to come to this country? What do you think? Pardon? Citizenship, maybe getting here and to live, right? And what else?
Fair wages?
Wages, a job, absolutely. If you're trying to make money to feed your children or to get medicine for your parents or whatever it is, you know, a job in the United States sounds pretty darn good. And in that case, the economic vulnerability was extreme. And as we look around the world too, we see that's happening more and more in our country and all over the place. The widening gap between rich and poor, the people trying to make it, it's increasingly difficult. And so that makes people increasingly vulnerable to these kind of pie in the sky promises. We also see increasing vulnerability of LGBT youth, LGBTQ, because again, increasingly vulnerable populations are going to be easy prey for traffickers. Any questions or comments? Y'all paying attention, thank you. This is nice. You get food, you get water, you can keep going. Women and girls have double vulnerability. So if you think of, and this is the case, how many, I don't know why these popular culture references are coming up from me this morning, but do you ever watch the series American Crime? Did you see the one on trafficking? So remember, and that was a series where they, throughout the whole season, what they do is they focus on one crime. This one was all human trafficking cases, labor and sex. Remember the young woman who was raped in the fields by the guy who, spoiler alert, somebody gets killed, but he was raped, and she called what happened. She said, I had to keep working and I had to keep my job, so I went to the Green Motel. The Green Motel is what they call him taking her out to the fields and raping her, and then she had to continue work. So that's the situation, unfortunately, with girls and children. Even if you're picking tomatoes by day, you're vulnerable. And in this case, it was a housekeeper being sexually assaulted by a family member. Often we don't remember that boys are also trafficked and men as well. In fact, I think some of those numbers where I'd mentioned men, 80%, men and boys 20%, women and girls 80%, or I should say women and children 80%, and men 20%. I think that number of men being trafficked in Florida is greater because of some of the prosecutions we've seen where hundreds of men have been victims in human trafficking cases. This is in Southwest Florida and Immokalee and some of our agricultural areas. So yes, boys are also victims of trafficking, and we can't forget about that. Very often as they age, they become trafficked, or they traffic themselves essentially for survival sex. And if you're under the age of 18, by the way, and you commit or are induced to commit any commercial sex act, you are a victim of trafficking. In this case, even if the boy is going out and about and saying, I don't have a pimp, I'm just trafficking, I'm just doing this so I can eat, I'm just doing this so I can have food or a roof over my head. In those kinds of cases, somebody, a John, is inducing him to commit that act. So what you see is under the law that John would be a trafficker. Any questions about that? Okay. So runaways are exploited at a great risk and at great risk. Florida is a magnet for runaways, and again, any child induced to perform a sex act is a trafficking victim. There's lots of good news around the state. Some of it is with DCF. You can see that we had a hotline change in terms of having a specific maltreatment code for trafficking added in 2009, and we've seen in that year 43 reports go up to 1,495 reports last year. So what we're seeing is people calling the abuse hotline, and some of you may be mandatory reporters. I don't know what your jobs are, but you know, if you suspect trafficking and you see a child, you are call the DCF hotline, and you might also consider immediately calling law enforcement if there's a dangerous situation. Traffickers can be organized crime, as I mentioned. It can be a mom and pop operation. It can be one person. It can be the wealthy person in Miami who brought in housekeepers from his country and was convicted, and I should say was found liable in a civil action for hundreds of thousands of dollars for back wages. Labor subcontractors in Florida are particularly egregious in terms of what they do. They're the ones that, you know, if you talk to, say, an orange grower, they might say, I don't hire one person to pick one orange. And it's true. They hire these labor subcontractors, and the labor subcontractors hire the actual laborers. So the Tropicanas and the Hiltons can say, oh, I never, you know, there's a bill to address some of that in the session. So we'll see if that goes through. But no, they can be all these people. My colleagues in Washington, diplomats often traffic people from their own country into this country to essentially be house slaves and work for them. Traffickers torture and brutally control their victims. That's another reason why they can't leave. It can look like kind of the most severe torture or domestic violence type situation, where victims are isolated as well as psychologically and physically abused and beaten. With some people from other countries, traffickers hold their passports, hold their identity documents. If you ever go to some countries, you'll find, you know, people in those countries don't get on a bus unless they have their identity documents. So if you take away their documents, you've essentially rooted them where they are. And it's very fearful, especially these days, to be out and about without identity documents and be someone in this country. We also see traffickers use drugs and alcohol to both get people hooked so that they comply. That was the case of the boys in Miami. That's what that pastor did, got them hooked, got them Xanax and all the other drugs to keep them dependent. And sometimes victims continue to take the drugs as a way of self-medicating in order to survive the situation. Okay, you can't read this from the back, probably. Just know human trafficking victim services needs are many. We have found that we need dentists sometimes. Sometimes I was trying to look for a dentist who spoke Spanish and could help a child of a trafficking victim that was in this area. Food, clothing, housing, shelter, any kind of shelter. And that's why we do training with the Carney Center or with Disc Village or with 211 Big Bend, because again, it takes a village. If any of you are in the community and work with any agencies that provide these services, I was going to leave this at the end to say this is what you can do, but I'll say it now. You know, you can start to talk to them about what they know about human trafficking and partnering with us. And partnering just means, you know, come in and do one of these trainings. Understand what a trafficking victim might look like and might present as, so you can provide that kind of assistance. Our legal system is pretty good, both in Florida and federally, in terms of helping trafficking victims. There are laws that help foreign-born victims be eligible to get immigration relief. And very often when I'm talking to some folks, like if you're talking to law enforcement, they might say, well, excuse me, I can help this child. I can bring this sexual abuse case. I don't even need to talk about trafficking. I don't even need to identify the trafficking case at all. Why should I even do that? Well, number one, if that child is foreign-born, there could be a slew of benefits that are eligible for that child, including the visa that I mentioned, including social services, etc. A child who is trafficked here could even bring his or her parents and siblings to this country. Know also that identifying the trafficking situation is vital. I talked to a drug treatment provider here locally who said, we just couldn't understand why she kept running away. Well, if you know she's got a pimp calling her, if you know she's got some sort of Stockholm syndrome thing going on, then you'll understand a little bit maybe differently what you need to do in terms of drug and alcohol rehab and that sort of thing. So know that that's really important. Anyway, so identifying people as trafficked is important so that they can be eligible for these benefits. Here are some more of the benefits that they can get. And note too that in our area we've got so much of this going on. Like, we don't have all that's needed, but clearly, you know, we have immigration relief available at the FSU Human Rights Center. And every time we do a training at another agency, really, that's a community partner that can help with the big long list of needs. But know that some of these protections you do need a lawyer to help with. Florida law is good as well. We generally align with federal law so that we have great protections for victims. We don't have great services. We only have a few of the safe harbor homes, if you will, or safe harbor facilities. There is a statewide human trafficking council. Michelle sits on that council, as do other agencies. And we do have very strong, actually, criminal penalties. Here are the safe harbor beds. We have drop-in centers. We have trained foster care, residential campuses, etc. I heard yesterday, though, it's very kind of distressing, where a home for boys in Tampa has not been getting the numbers of referrals to it that would be great for them to get, because there obviously are young males being trafficked. So it's really this issue of awareness is so important, spreading the word about the existence of both trafficking and available resources. Okay, this looks all legally, and I'm a lawyer, I confess it, but I put this up here because this is a really important point, and it might sound obscure, but I want to just give you the contours of it so you can know that this exists. Our laws in Florida are structured to provide something called expungement, and that means that if anyone, a minor or an adult, commits a crime and is arrested or convicted of any crime committed while that person was being trafficked, they can get their record wiped clean. All right, there's a process for it. And you know, the first time, even as a lawyer, when I heard this, I felt, you know, it's important, but it's kind of maybe not the most important law. But I will tell you, the more I talk to people, the more I realize that this is the key to people healing and moving forward. And why do you think? You're nodding your head, and I heard an uh-huh. Yeah, why?
Well, I was going to say, a lot of people probably don't say anything because they know that they've been part of criminal activity, so that they're concerned about their own record. You know, I'm telling on myself, but if they know that they have like refuge and that this opportunity exists for them, they may be more willing to come forward.
Right, right. So, so what you just said was, you know, if people realize that this resource is available, if they think of something way in their past where they have a criminal record, that might be holding them back possibly from applying to be a nurse or to be a daycare provider or to do whatever. And then they're forced to lie on their application maybe, you know, it could have been years ago. But this remedy is really important, yes.
I think to tie into what this lady said as well as psychologically.
Mm-hmm.
If it's expunged, it kind of lets you know you are 10, 15, whatever, you know, you can't be really held responsible for that. And psychologically, I would think that would help as well with that.
It's an excellent point.
Yeah.
That's really an excellent point. So what does it say internally when you know that I wasn't responsible, that I really was being forced, that they were giving me drugs, this was not my own volition, they were threatening me, and now my record is clear. And that's both an arrest, even if no prosecution happened, as well as a conviction. So I think this law is really important. When we did a whole presentation on this last year to our local legal services program, they right then and there decided to assign a lawyer who has expertise in this now to help people in our area obtain this. We've also talked to our public defender's office so that they know, especially with juveniles, but all people, that they can end up getting their record cleared. And this is really, really important. And there's a national project doing this. In New York City, the woman who was doing this was talking about how every month they do like 1,100 of these expungement cases. Because so this is the other part about it. Why are victims needing this? Because victims are getting arrested and prosecuted. Anybody see anything wrong with this picture? Right. they shouldn't be getting arrested and prosecuted to begin with. So what we're doing is hoping that law enforcement, prosecution, et cetera, start to recognize that these are indeed victims, and then in real time start to make defenses, and then go forward after that. So anyway, that's why this is important too. It really reflects kind of the flaws in the system to date and the lack of understanding of what's happening, but know that it is getting better. So quick and easy next steps. Posting of information, and you have information. In fact, this little spiral bound tool is bar none one of the best things I have seen anywhere in the country on trafficking. And even though it says child trafficking, Michelle, I confess, there's stuff about adults in here. So important, so good. So please make sure you get these. These are like gold. In fact, I'm going to take another. No, I won't. If you want one, you can have it. But they're really, really good. So materials, one of the things, I have a few of these. These are something that our Zonta Club of Tallahassee, Ann, does. These are sticky notes. You peel one off, you put it in the bathroom when you go to a restaurant or a hotel, you put it on the hotel mirror when you're checking out. Somebody said they saw it on a gas tank when they were pumping gas. This is the national hotline number that I mentioned, 888-37-37-888. Let anybody know who's a possible helper, whether it's a congregant in a church or a teacher, that there is help. You can take, I have some of these with me. If you want some of those, you can take them and share them and put them all over the place. Cover the world with them. Know your local resources. You know STAC. STAC is also, if you call this number or you go on the National Human Trafficking Hotline website, you'll see a lot of different services all over the country. For our area, we and CCYS are two of the providers here locally. But no, if you're going to Oklahoma, you'll find resources in Oklahoma as well. You know that. Interpreters, if you're working with anybody and you start to do this with any of your social groups, interpreters are important. And again, the key phone number is that hotline number, as well as STAC's number, and you can have that. More resources. This PowerPoint, Michelle's going to have this PowerPoint, so you'll be able to see this. You can't write all this down, but just know the National Human Trafficking Resource Center will get you, or just Google National Human Trafficking Hotline. You'll get all this kind of information. So as a member of the community, one of the things that I want to mention is that we've got some more stuff going on this month, and then I'll be able to wrap it up, Michelle. We have, gosh, I feel like it's been like a foot race. And you know what the other part is? January happens after the holidays, which is really incredible to plan anything. If any of you think about planning something, you really can't plan anything until you have to start in July, whatever. But so this month has been crazy busy, but all good. This Friday from 2 to 4, we're having a training for healthcare providers, and you can go on our website and see a lot of this stuff. It's really great. So there's a training for healthcare providers on Friday here locally with the Leon County Health Department. On Monday at the law school from 12:30 to 4. There'll be a training for justice system people. And on the way over here, literally, I walked a woman through registering she goes, I'm not a lawyer, I'm a member of the community. And I said, well, you should, yeah, I'm glad you're coming. So it's free, both of those are free. It's at the law school, and it will feature a panel on sex trafficking, labor trafficking, and then a big justice system roundtable where we'll have Jack Campbell, Walt McNeil, our U.S. Attorney Chris Canova, and others speak about reforms in the justice system. That night there'll be a film called Very Young Girls at FSU Student Life Cinema. And by the way, you can go on STAC's website, which is surviveandthriveadvocacy.org. That's my email to robin@surviveandthriveadvocacy.org. You can go to our website and see all this on there. And then on the 30th, we're having an event which is kind of a premier, different kind of fundraiser and awareness event than we've ever had in our area. Who knows the restaurant Food Glorious Food and Susan Turner? It's really good, right? Mm-hmm. So last year, Susan came to our legal event and said she wanted to help, and she wanted to help by doing a fundraiser. So what we've been doing, we are having an event where all the food that will be served will be trafficking free, fair trade, slavery-free food. So she's going to do the dishes and create. We've had donations from restaurants and caterers from around town to kind of raise the awareness of the existence of labor trafficking, so that we know in our area where we get this lettuce or we get this pork, we know it's come from a place where hands that have been forced into labor will not have produced it. And that's another thing I wanted to leave you with, the idea of, so that event's on the 30th at the Turnbull Center, and information about that is at our website as well. That brings me to saying, what can you do? You know, one of the things is to be aware of who we are as consumers and what we're consuming. For that event, Susan is going to do a little talk, and she's going to call it Cooking with a Conscience. I talked to somebody the other day, and they said, you know what, I saw on a list that the chocolate, now I can't say this is true, but the chocolate from M&M's has some taint to it in terms of being produced by child labor. Junior Mints, not so much. So she's decided to munch on satisfy her sugar cravings with Junior Mints. But that's just a little example of what we can do to be aware of what's going on in our world and contribute to how to make it better. So anyway, do what you can do. I have a friend who makes jewelry who's donating part of the proceeds to Stack. She's a jewelry maker. She's not going to be necessarily working with trafficking victims, but she's got that. Her name is Quincy Hamby, and she's helping also to, again, make the world a better place in the way she knows how to do it. So we all can be challenged around that way. You're challenged already, and you've come to this event. Thank you very much for being so patient and listening. And everybody stayed awake. I always call that a plus when I have all eyes open throughout the whole hour. And if there's any other final questions and thoughts, and then we can wrap up. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Do you all offer training with parents? I was thinking about the comment where it was saying, you know, where are these parents? Training with parents on perhaps best practices or recommendations on practices for, you know, being aware and you know, doing things to kind of protect your kids. You can't protect them at all times, but some things that might set things in order. Because I know I was lucky. My mom worked for the state attorney's office in the sex abuse unit, so certain things we weren't allowed to do because she was aware. But all parents don't have that knowledge. So sometimes, you know, they're a little more free with letting them spend the night at certain places or doing things without kind of going through vetting, making sure these are the right people for them to be around.
I first of all, love that you asked that question. I wonder if Michelle has some ideas on that. But what I want to say is, I don't usually say this, but yeah, you as parents, what do you need to do to get more informed? And do you have any ideas about programs?
Absolutely. We train parents all the time. We're actually partnering with the Florida PTA. They do 2 statewide trainings, once in the spring and once in the fall, and that is actually in various locations. I can give you that contact information. The sheet went around. I'll share that with you. We have that posted on our website whenever they have trainings, but just know that parents are being trained in the schools. Whenever we go out and train, we always ask the administration to include parents in that conversation. We can't do it unless we're combined together, working as partners and collaborating in this effort, because trafficking is a huge issue. If we think about kids being trafficked at the ages of 10, 11, 12 years old, those are our students. And if we aren't doing our best to connect with parents so they understand the issues, we really aren't doing our job either. So it's not enough just to be on the school side. But there are trainings going on. And actually this past weekend we were at the Temple of Israel. That was a community faith-based group that had a conference there. It was a one-day event. Fantastic event. Again, that's going on all the time around Tallahassee, and opportunities like that, free to you to go out and be a part of, will be also listed on the website, but I'll be happy to share that with you later on. Any other questions, please? I feel a question brewing. I feel it. Well, I want to encourage you to get one of these guidebooks. I created this, disseminated this statewide to all our folks when earlier Robin said something to the effect of training 6,000 folks. Actually, in August, I trained over 6,000 bus drivers and monitors alone in August of 2017. So this training has been going on and really just kind of trying to infiltrate every area. I want to quickly tell you, when I trained the Leon County bus drivers, when it was over with, one of the drivers came to me afterwards and said, do you think I can get another one of those books to give my pastor? And I said, sure. She said, I think we need to know about this at the church. And I agree with that. And after a talk, my bureau chief, Dr. Kathy Nobles, asked me if I would come to her church in Liberty County to present on trafficking to her congregation. And I said, let's get someone from the outside to come in. And we found a great partner to present there. But again, faith-based groups understanding the need to have this information in front of them, as well as all members of the community. Any other questions for anyone? But they're all over here. One second. Hang on. Let's repeat that question real quick.
Was there an event coming up in Quincy related to the labor?
Yes, both labor and sex trafficking, and that will be on the 20th, this Saturday, from 10 to 2 at New Bethel AME Church in Quincy. We're helping them organize it in terms of helping get some speakers in, but it's a community event. And again, that is on the website. Would love to see you there. What I absolutely am so excited about for that community is they've come forward and said, we want to be trained on trafficking, and we want to figure out what our next steps are. So it's the community saying this is what we need to do. And so what we want to do is just give them a menu of options for how they can take their next steps, whether it's having a healthcare training or any of these other things, or a forum at any of the schools. So yes, thank you, Ann. Thank you.
Question, anyone else? The reason we're using the mic so it shows up on the recording that's going to be transcribed for everyone. So
it's not your ears that you haven't been hearing amplification. It's for the video.
Folks,
Yes, sir.
my question is, if, let's say for instance, if I were to, my question centers around this. If I were to report something and I want it to remain anonymous, because sometimes I know people may have information that they would like to share with the appropriate authorities. However, they don't want to, quote, get involved, or they'd like to remain anonymous. How does that work?
Well, two things. One is, let me tell you this. It is rare that you see something going on and you go, that's human trafficking. It's a suspicion. So you say, I'm suspecting this. I don't know if it's true. I don't want to get somebody in trouble. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Is this right? Is this wrong? So let me tell you, number one, you probably will only be suspecting it. So that's the first thing. Two is, yes, you can report it anonymously. This phone number, this national hotline number, allows for complete anonymous reporting, as does the 96 Abuse, the DCF hotline as well. That also allows for anonymous reporting, because it's really to encourage the information to get in and then help to get to the victims. I can also tell you that our local law enforcement has been pleading with a lot of us who are service providers that even if a victim is not ready to come in and be a witness in a criminal case, just please tell them where trafficking is going on. And it's true, sometimes victims aren't ready to come. They're distrustful of law enforcement. They've had a bad experience in the past, or for whatever reason. But getting the information that it might be happening will start to alert law enforcement so they can start to do investigations. And then we would work with the victim to see, when and if that person is ready to be fully participatory. But the short answer, I'm a lawyer. I'm going to say all these words all the time. The short answer is yes.
And I'd like to encourage you, something I tell folks, find out what the non-emergency number is in your area, especially for Leon County. Plug that in your phone, because oftentimes it isn't a 911 emergency, but you want to report something or you want to notify someone of an issue. But that's a great number to have in your phone. And just a quick note I want to share with you. 2 years ago, Governor Scott signed into law that every Florida citizen is a mandated reporter when it comes to child abuse, the suspicion of child abuse. So if you think about it, if a child is being trafficked, that is child abuse. There's not a huge leap there. It's connected. So understanding that if you suspect it, you report it. And it's okay. I'd rather err on the side of I made a judgment call and I was concerned and it turned out to be nothing. I'd rather err on that side than not report and let it gnaw on me for the rest of my days, or find out something actually occurred and I did not do my part. But folks, you've been a great audience. Unless there's another question, I'm going to give Robin the last word, and I'm going to thank her from the bottom of my being for being here today. But she's been a great guest, and I'm going to let you have the final word. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And I wanted to also let you know that in addition to this number, our number at STAC, which is 850, well, it's up here, 850-597-2080. If you do suspect it, just call and say, look, this is going on. I don't know what it is. I can't interpret it. Something's happening. I mean, at one point in one of the state office buildings, someone said, I work here late at night, and I think the cleaning crew, who is not a state employee, you know, contracted out, I think there might be trafficking going on here. I don't know. What should I look for? What should I say? No, too, you can have these little sticky notes. You can pass them to people. You can write it down. You can, you know, I haven't done it yet, but if I suspected this in a restaurant, I might just put this on the check when I send it back if I think something's going on. You know, we can keep these in our purses really easily and in our pockets. So just know passing on information can be a very powerful thing, and we're here to help even kind of suss out a situation if you want to talk about it. So anyway, thanks again. Thank you, Michelle. You're wonderful. I appreciate you all very much.